Welcome back to the Automation Podcast, the world's #1 industrial automation product and technology show, thanks to you, our audience of highly skilled automation professionals. Now, if you're new to the show, my name is Shawn Tierney from Insights in Automation, and I want to thank you and our entire audience for tuning in this week. Now, in this episode, I sit down with John DeTellem of Siemens to learn all about migrating from older versions of S7 PLCs and TIA Portal software to the newest versions. You know, we just covered version 21 with John a few weeks ago, and now he walks through what you do to migrate. Maybe you have 19 or 20 and you want to go to 21, and he walks us through the steps to do that. And I found it really interesting that you don't have to flash the firmware out of your controller right away, and you don't have to actually upgrade your program right away to be able to use these. So there's some flexibility there to keep the PLC at the older firmware while you migrate your software, or even download the software to a PLC that has the new firmware in it without upgrading your software. So really interesting stuff, and he goes through it all. But before we get to that, we got a couple of announcements. First, I want to thank Siemens for sponsoring this episode. Not only did they take time out of their busy schedule to come on the show, but they also sponsor the show so we could release it to the broadest audience, the widest audience as possible. So we really appreciate their sponsorship. And the other announcement I have is from the Automation Museum. They wanted me to let you guys know that the first 8 episodes are now out over at youtube.com/@Automation Museum. And so the first 8 episodes of the History of Automation podcast is out. We have 4 more in the queue that are coming. So please go over and check out that channel and give us a subscription, because myself and the other hosts of that show are working very hard on the weekends to bring you more podcasts about legacy automation. Really interesting stuff. So with that said, let's go ahead now and jump into this week's episode and learn all about migrating from older versions of TIA Portal and S7 firmware to the latest and greatest. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show, and I want to thank John for coming back on. He's going to walk us through something which I know, if you haven't used it in a while, can be a little confusing. So John, thank you for coming back on the show. Appreciate you doing the recent V21 update. And now you're going to give us for some of us, it'll be a review. For some of us, it'll be new information. But go ahead and let me turn the floor over to you.
Yeah. So the one thing that we agreed to talk about was an understanding of upgrading the project to the latest version, V21, from the previous versions where the project might reside. And then secondarily to that is updating the version or the image of the devices that exist. And the one key thing that I think this will make it easier to understand is that if I'm working in an older version like a V17 or a V18 TI Portal on my machine, our intent is that the devices that come out with new firmware are compatible with the older versions. So if my demo equipment that I'm running here in V20, I put in a brand new PLC or have to update the HMI, our objective, our intent is that the new device, even though it won't show up in my catalog with the part number and the firmware, it is backward compatible with the V19. So that's the first thing that I want people to think about is I'm working with V17 or V18 or V19, and I get a replacement PLC for something that might happen, or I have a new machine, but I still want to use that older version. I can use the new hardware or the new image, the new firmware, and it will be backward compatible with that old set.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a minute. So I have an existing machine. I'm using V17 on it. Let's say it's a 1500, for example. And I don't know what the firmware would be. It could be 3.x, 4.x, whatever it is. Now, I have to buy one for the spares for the shelf, right? Yep. And that one could be newer because it's bought after the machine. What you're saying is that if we get a newer unit, from the storeroom, that Siemens' intent is that newer unit will be able to plug right into the same spot as the older unit. And, assuming that everything else is the same, right? It has the same number of Ethernet ports and all that stuff, Ethernet ports and all that. It'll be able to plug into the same unit. You'll be able to download the same program to it, so that you don't have to really worry that if the replacement in the spare in the storeroom is newer, the intent is that the newer unit will always be able to replace an older unit, and you won't have to buy a software upgrade. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. Yep. And the other thing is, you don't typically need to download. You just move the memory card. The memory card has the full running application in the 1500. So the intent is you pull the memory card out of the PLC because you know that's what was running in the predecessor version. If it's a replacement, if it's a new machine, then that's the other. But I've done it before where I just pulled the memory card out of the older version of the hardware. It was a 02 that you see here on the screen. And then I put in a new hardware, which is the 03, the latest. These numbers go up. And in my case, it was probably a 3.1 because it was a couple years ago. Put that memory card from the 2.9 firmware on this hardware into this one, put it in run mode, and that was good. Because that's the device.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Because the device is backward compatible.
And that's important to know because the 1500s, they require that cymatic memory card, right? So you're not going to use a 1500 without that official card. But the upside of that is that unlike a lot of other products on the market, if it goes down, you just put the card out, put it in the new one, and you're good to go. So that, from an ease of replacement, that's just awesome. And the cards are like all these industrial cards. They're very reasonable in price based on having to be industrial. But that's pretty awesome. So let me turn it back to you.
Yeah. So that's the first thing that people need to really grasp is that even though there's new version of TF Auto v21, even though there's new versions of the firmware 4.1, I can still use the new hardware that comes out in my systems if I'm not ready to upgrade to v21. I'm v21 yet. The other thing that's key to understand is you can see on my screen, I am working right now on a v20 online with my running demo. And I've already updated this PLC firmware to a 4.1, which is not shown. So even though v20, the latest firmware and functionality it supports is a 4.0, the actual device that exists in this running system is a 4.1 firmware because I've been doing things with v21, so I upgraded the firmware so I could see it. So I can go here, I can connect to that PLC online, and you can see that it's a 4.1.
So in your project, this is a version 20 project. You have told it the controller, the PLC is a version 4.0, and you downloaded that to the actual physical PLC, which is a 4.1.
Correct.
And I noticed you have, is that why you have, there's an orange exclamation point at the top of the project tree. Is that what that is telling us? Or is that something else?
That's because I don't use passwords.
Okay, that's fine. So do you, when you go to download this and it sees, hey, the firmware is newer than what your project's set to, does it give you a complaint? Does it say, hey, are you sure you want to do this?
No, normally on that, it doesn't. On some of the other ones, like the HMI will notice that it's a newer version of the image, and the HMI will queue more. It will queue me if I'm downloading this v20 project into the PLC and it's a v21. I have a screenshot of that I captured because I was downgrading it yesterday.
Yep.
Or this morning. So it will say, for example, I've been working on this demo equipment the last week, and I've been doing a v21. This morning, I wanted to start with v20. So when I went to download it, the download dialog came up and said, hey, the device you're downloading to is a v21. Are you sure that you want to download it to a v20? Because it knows it's degrading or downgrading the functionality.
Got it. Great. Well, that's good. Well, and it's good because you may not, you may get a unit in, it's been flashed to the newer firmware, but you need to keep the program in 20 for whatever reason so that we can continue to use that, which I think is so So pretty, awesome. And again, if you're using HMI, you may want to keep it. That's one reason why you may want to not change it, is because there may be other things connected to it, and you don't want to change everything. Maybe you'll do that when things are down, but right now we just want to keep the machine up and running, so we don't want to be forced into migrating. So that's
Right.
awesome. Okay, good.
Yeah, that's the one thing I really try to drive home is that start somewhere where you know uh, that is reachable, like the PLC, where it's not going to make an impact, and I don't have to risk dealing with the HMI or the drive or the third-party devices that might be connected, or OPC UA things that might get impacted by doing the upgrades. Is start somewhere such as the firmware of the PLC, the project revision of the project, yeah, Portal v21. And then you can, after everything verifies it's communicating, like HMI, then you can start to go, all right, next week I'll do the HMI, I'll do the drives, and then I'll bridge it so that I have a strategy. And the other thing I really try to bring home is if something does show its head that is not necessarily supporting the migration to the firmware or the of the version of the project, realize that you can go back to V20 or V19 and reload the previous project. So you see the demo project that I actually opened was a V19 with a 3.1 firmware, update 2 of the HMI. And as soon as I opened it in V20, it's put an underscore V20. So the V19 project is still on my computer. And then I had this V20.
And I think we also have to be a little pragmatic about this too. I've over the years run into some, especially the younger engineers who or technicians or electricians who they don't understand just because there's a new version doesn't mean you need to upgrade, right? It's not like our phones and our TVs that are always forcing this upgrade. You know, Production is king, right? Uptime is king.
Yep.
So if there's not a reason to upgrade, you don't need to. Now, if you're building a new machine or putting in a new system, it may make sense to use the latest and greatest, or it may make sense to match it with what you already have installed. But I think all the listeners probably know this too. They'll agree with me. Be pragmatic about the upgrades. If there's a new feature you have to have, great. But, if the system's running and making money for the company and paying your paycheck, think twice before upgrading it. Why are we doing this? What's the practical reason for doing the upgrade?
Right. The other thing that I had a conversation the other day is there's two types of people. I'm the type that will do it through a process and test one step at a time because I want to know exactly where there's a problem. The other guy, he's going to have the attitude it should work. I'm going to do it all. And if it doesn't work, then I'm going to go complain to the vendor and go post things on Reddit that it didn't work. And my attitude is that when I get that guide, then I try to back them. Hey, you got to go step by step so that we know where and what device is the problem. And you got to be reasonable about the concept of being, like you said, pragmatic about it.
And you have to think about it's not just your computer, it's everybody else who's going to be working on this machine as well. So typically, some of the listeners, they're in an island. They're the only one who's working on these systems. But some of them have colleagues who all their computers will also need to be updated as well. So you don't want to, and I've seen that many times, and it causes a lot of consternation in the plant when somebody does an upgrade, and now everybody has to update their laptops because they don't have the right, the software installed, the newest software installed. So let me turn it back to you.
Exactly. Yep. So what I'm going to try to do is take this running system and just update it from a V20 project to a V21 project, and then update the device of the PLC for now, and then update the instruction set. So it'll be a multiple step project. But you can see here's my simulation of my HMI this is actually a simulation of my V19 project running in V20. I migrated it to V20, but I didn't really change anything in it other than, underscore V20. But it does run the drive and the little fake conveyor simulation mode. So the drive is running in the background and providing me that feedback. I don't know if you can hear that or not always.
Yep.
But the other day when I did this, the cool part was the HMI continued to function even after I had upgraded the PLC and the project. So I'll close this project. save this project because I want to use this exact project that I had all the green checkboxes. And I'll close this because I'm going to migrate this one. If I could find it, this will take a second. Cool. And then the cool thing is after my project is closed, I can use the online accessible devices to see all the devices that I have on my network. I have 3 or 4 PLCs, a couple HMIs, a couple drives. So I can go in here and pick each one of these, and I can actually do the firmware update through this online access with this tool right here without a project open. But I do have my V20 project open. And here's I was looking at it earlier today. This is my G2 1500, G2 1200. I went in here just to get ready to upgrade the firmware. I'm not going to do it right now because it takes a minute. But I downloaded from the support site the 4.0 for this G2 PLC. It was released this week. I browsed to the file so I could do the update. And then I click on this and it'll update the PLC. But I'm not going to do an update today. I don't think we need to do that because that's something that I think we can deal with another time. But let's go ahead and I'll see if I can find that same project. Give me a moment. I might have to edit some of this stuff out while I search for that demo project. So here I found that V20 project. It says AP20. It's a underscore V20. And the cool part is V21 will make an effort to read that file and search what's in it. And basically it will check to make sure that my V21 installation has the components required to upgrade the components that are in the project. So it recognizes that I've got some step 7 with some safety, a few WinCC devices that exist, and some drives. So it goes through and it agrees that it's a good installation of V21, and then it's going to relabel it as V21. So I hit upgrade, and then it'll go through a process. In these later versions, V20, V21, there's not as many changes to the core database of the devices. So this is not as significant as it was in V11 or V12 or V13 or V14. In the V18, V19, V20, fundamentally the core of the PLCs and the HMIs are staying the same, and each version just adds a few new features like we talk about during the update of V21 on the other podcast.
Hey guys, just breaking in here really quick to thank Siemens for sponsoring this episode so we can release it on all platforms. Really appreciate it when vendors do that. And I wanted to ask you, if you're enjoying this, if you're finding this helpful, I know I did. It was a great refresher for me. But if you're finding this helpful, please let Siemens know. It helps them justify coming on the show more often. And we really appreciate them sponsoring the shows too, so we can, cover some of our production costs. Now, if you use other products besides Siemens, please reach out to them. Tell them to contact me directly. I'd love to have them on the show. I mean, the only caveat is it has to be industrial automation related, typically focused on automation, of manufacturing and process industries. But in any case, I do get a lot of people from outside the industry wanting to come on. But in any case, I know there's some vendors I reach out to every month that are like favorites of you guys, the people out there in the audience, and I just get crickets back. So please let your vendors know. Say, hey, you should go on the automation podcast. Shawn is very easy to work with. Just reach out to him. My contact info is all over the place. But in any case, we'd love to cover every vendor that you're using. And we've already covered, I don't know, over 100 different vendors, but we want to keep expanding it and get some of the previous vendors to come back on. So we could use your help with that. And just let them know how much you appreciate the show and how valuable it is to you and the work you do. With that said, we're ready to jump back into this episode and learn more about migrating our S7 and TIA portal projects.
So the first thing that you'll notice up here is there's an underscore V21. And so basically, it's given the database, the project file, a different unique identifier underscore v21, so that it's not overriding our v20 project or even my v19 project. And then hopefully, theoretically, the PLC still is consistent with v20 as it was with v21. So I should get hopefully good green statuses. Maybe a little bit of something going on with the difference here that I can overcome with maybe something I didn't compile in the previous version or didn't migrate properly in v21. But you can see that usually all I get is this little version indicating that there's a difference. And I can go and monitor everything except for this one that some reason decided that was going to be different. And I do get that occasion. But here I can monitor what's going on in my machine, even though the PLC is still a v20 project. So now I'm using v21, the v21 project of the v20 project, and I'm monitoring the PLC. So I can monitor and troubleshoot.
So what you've done here is you've opened the v20 project in v21, it converted it to be v21, and you immediately went online with the PLC that had the v20 project in it. And you didn't have to switch back to v20. You could stay in v21, and we're online, we're monitoring, we can edit without having to, re-download a v21 version of this program to the PLC. And that's really cool. Now, is the question, if I do make an edit using v21, does that now stop v20 from connecting again and looking at it?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So now I would decide that I'm ready to, I've validated that the project seems to compile in v21. I'm going to go ahead and download that to the PLC. So, I might do some compiles to make sure, that it's okay being a 15 PLC in a v21 environment. So I'll run the compile based on v21, and then I'll download it to the PLC, which is going to download the entire hardware and software. And then I'll stop the PLC. In this case, it will stop the PLC. And then I'll put it in run mode and test it. And the key is, one thing is, I haven't yet updated the PLC. So v21 is still using the PLC in a what do you want to say, a backward compatible mode, where it's still seeing it as an older version of the PLC.
Okay, so that's important. The PLC is still at version 3.1. Got it.
Yep. Now, this might be a step that, you just go right ahead and change the firmware to one of the later versions, and just accept the fact that it is a 4.1, or you can download. What do you want to do?
No, let's go ahead and download. So that's the firmware version of the PLC in the project.
Right.
Which doesn't have to match because the hardware is backward compatible. Doesn't have to match.
Yep. So it gives a nice notice here.
Yep. It's making you check the boxes to make sure you know that, hey, the project in this 20, you're downloading the 21. You sure you want to do this? You're upgrading the project in the unit. Yep. Good. Yeah. Very helpful.
Yeah. So you got to expand these things and read them. Now, the one thing that's hanging up is the fact that I got a view of things. Okay. So it wants that to be compiled separately. So explicit compile of the view of things application is required separately from the PLC, because it's a kind of an HMI on the PLC.
Yep.
So if I go down here to the web application view of things, just recompile that so that it's now compiled in v21. Then I can go back to the PLC, and I should have that same preview dialog without that error.
Yeah, we did cover that when that first came out. It was a very, very cool feature.
Yeah, it's a nice feature. So now I that one's okay. It's going to download it again. It's giving me clear notice that because it's going to download some of the hardware, it's going to stop it. It's going to upgrade the PLC so that it's actually running a v21 project, regardless of the firmware. And then I hit load, and I see my PLC stop and flash on the display. It's indicating a download in progress.
Now, if you were using some of the new V21 features, you'd very likely have to update the firmware on the PLC. Or in this case, your PLC's firmware is already upgraded, but you'd have to tell to unlock those new features, you'd have to change the version of firmware in your project. Because, as we know, version 3.1 of the firmware doesn't have all the bells and whistles that version 4.1 has.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I just went to the push buttons and reset my safety. And the cool part is my machine is running. So I'm migrated to V21, but I kind of maintained a safe threshold of not changing the PLC yet, just to make sure that the V21 didn't upset the apple cart and change anything. So then the next step is, okay, let's embrace changing the device to the new firmware. So now I can go here to properties, change firmware revision, and it right away recognizes what's the latest. So when I do it down there, it basically comes up and it gives me an indication that, okay, this part number 0303 does have a couple other options beyond the 3.1. I mean, I could even, if something was wrong, go back, but I want to go forward because I trust Siemens. Been here long enough that I know. So now this is the part where I say, okay, now I'm going to make my PLC a 4.1 firmware. And basically now it's taking advantage of all the new features and functionalities and security benefits of the new 1500. Again, you want to select the PLC. If I select this and do compile, it's going to compile a software part of the PLC. I like to go up here and set my context to the hardware and the software, and then I just hit this compile.
Yep. Yeah, if you had a big project, it may make sense if you've only changed, like, let's say a data block, just recompile that data block, right? But, that may affect other, like the main OB or other blocks. So, if you just want to download, just compile the whole thing.
Yep. Honestly, when you do the download, it's doing a compile.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's frustrating to get to this download dialog and
Can't go forward. Yep.
Yeah, have to go back. So again, it's going to come up and it's going to say, hey, it's going to reset it because we're making such a drastic change. It's going to stop it. So in case I'm still running the machine, I would go to the HMI. It's going to update some of the safety features because that changed in the web app. So I like this preview dialog download. For me, it's like a little stethoscope that gives me all the details of the health of my online device and what is going to happen to it once this download happens.
Yeah, and back to what we were just talking about. If you've made a lot of changes to the program, do a compile. If you made some minor changes, likely the download's going to do compile and you're going to be able to go forward. But yeah, it does get frustrating to have it when you go to do a download, to have it bring up the download window and say, oh, something didn't compile. For me, it's usually I forget to disable the password because I'm just working on the test bench. So I don't need the password. It's like, ugh, now I got to close that. I got to go all the way down. So doing the compile first. And I think as people use it, they know, when should I compile it before I download, or when can I just go right to download because there's a low risk of having any issues?
Yep. So it's downloaded and then now it's updated to the matching firmware. And I'll walk over here and hit my little safety assimilate and validate the safety functions. and it's back up and running. And the cool part is my machine is up and running.
And now you can take advantage of all the new features we talked about in the previous episode because you have everything updated to the latest and greatest.
Yep. Yep.
So for people used to working with other brands, this may be quite different. You know, there's no lockstep here. You have the independence, like we did in with older PLCs. We still have that with the latest and greatest from Siemens. That independence between the firmware version, the version of the software, the version of the firmware in the software. Again, if you want to use all the latest features, you're going to have to go to the newest firmware and the newest software. But if you're just maintaining a system, then you have a lot of options here. You don't have to, automatically upgrade the firmware or the software to continue to maintain it.
Yeah. And the one thing that, different from what I have in my little workshop here and you have there in the lab is our customers have huge systems with third-party devices and robots and interfaces and drives. And you have to take into the consideration that when you make this change to the main device of the PLC, you're going to have to validate that it maintains the communication and the connectivity to all the other components that are in there. So that's what's nice about this process, lockstep. If in this last step that the 4.1 firmware in the project of v21 created a situation with one of my interfaces, I could backtrack. You have to remain calm and you have to be pragmatic about what steps would I go back to determine how do I get my confidence back to, because ultimately, what we want the machine to be running for the management people there. So it's kind of creepy.
Yeah, and I've done that too, where I'll be trying a new feature, working with you and Lewis and the other the people on your team, but then I have to go back and add a lesson to one of my courses that's using an existing, a previous version, and so I'll downgrade the controller. I'll open up a VM just for that class, and I'll use the older version. It's nice to have that independence to be able to go forward and backward, and be able to use the newer software with the older firmwares and vice versa. So. I think that's it's so flexible, and it's kind of reminiscent of how other people used to do it years ago. But, it's good that Siemens has kept that. And I would like to know from the audience, what do you think? I mean, those of you using this in the field, have you found any gotchas, or you have any questions that maybe John and I can answer? And for those of you using Siemens products, what do you think? Is this more flexible or more confusing for you? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments.
So there's two more things that I can do here. So I just want to, give everybody a moment to, digest all the things that we've kind of covered so far. But the final thing is the actual instruction set also has a version on the instruction set that resides within the PLC. So these instruction sets that are in the configuration of the PLC also have a version to them. And some of them get updated with each release for bug fixes or whatever. So there's one final step that a lot of people miss is, an upgrade the program, update the program instructions. So this will basically look through any counter or motion or move instructions that might have been fixed or updated in the v21, and it will basically update the reference instructions that are used for the project and fix any bugs that might have been identified from v20 to v21. So then that would be another step that is kind of required. And you can see, it looks like there's some safety stuff and some other stuff that kind of got updated in the instruction sets. So that would be one more final little download to get myself completely up to, and again, you don't have to do that upgrade program if your instruction set works for the running machine. It's just, I like people to understand that if you were to start a new project with this PLC and use the latest and greatest stuff, that's where we would be at. This time I'll see if I can actually download that with the software, since it didn't look like it showed up as anything in the hardware. But it is going to, because I think there's some motion stuff. But basically, yeah, now it'll do a reload of some of the hardware configuration stuff that's related to the instructions. But that's the final little update for the PLC. Cool.
Yeah, so that if you have an older system and it operates a little differently, the instruction operates a little differently than the latest system, that's something to keep in mind that, it's not only firmware, it's the instructions as well. And so keep that in mind. That's part of, what all these industrial automation vendors do is in testing their products as they're updating that stuff.
Yep. So I think it's to me, coming from the other vendor and doing things the other ways and some of the other stuff that I've struggled with in the past, I really appreciate the concept of this flexibility. And again, I haven't even updated the HMI. My HMI is still a image that is a v19 update 2 in the project here. So this little HMI device is still the v19 version. My actual HMI hardware is a v20 image, and it's got a v21 project that's running in it. So to me, I like the fact that I can focus on one thing at a time, like the PLC and the motion control. And then in a couple of weeks, once I have all the confidence in the world of this, then I can tackle the HMI as a little priority.
Absolutely. So I think that was an excellent run through that. I mean, it was a great refresher for me, and I hope everybody who's watching, I thought it was a good refresher, or maybe you learned something new if you're not using the Siemens yet. But John, I really appreciate coming on and going over that. Was there anything else you wanted to cover before we end the show?
No, I think that was the key. Is the highlight of that. There's some slides that explain some of the stuff in the links to the other update that I'm going to give you. But I think this is the most important part, is to have this available as a little tech tip that you can show.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate coming back on, John. Really do.
Absolutely.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I know I did. That was a great refresher for me. I haven't touched some of that stuff in a while, and I really appreciate John coming on. He's actually coming back on to show me how to upgrade my licenses, which I'm going to share to you as a tech tip. So that'll be pretty cool to do as well. But I do want to thank Siemens for sponsoring this episode, coming on the show, bringing us up to speed. I also want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in. There would be no reason to have a show if you guys weren't interested in this kind of stuff. So thank you for tuning in. I do want to wish you all good health and happiness. And until next time, my friends, peace.